Hello, everybody. Welcome back to TMR's Master Advisors series. We have a lot to get to today, so we're going to kick us off straight at the top of the hour. Today is January 26th, 2023. This is Master Advisor episode number 65. We have two terrific travel advisors and travel agency executives here to talk about dealing with client disruptions. I have a few announcements to get to first, and then I have a sponsor I want to introduce. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who are new, there are a couple of things you can do to sort of make the most out of this session. The first is to switch into speaker view, which you can do by toggling in on the view button on your top right there. That'll switch into speaker view, into gallery view. Speaker view is going to be the one you're going to want to stick with through the next 45-50 minutes or so. Also, I want to remind everyone that the chat on the bottom right is open. You can open up the chat with the chat button at the bottom, and then it opens on the bottom right. I already see a couple people popping in there, but we're going to do our best to grab questions from there as we go along today. So please drop any and all questions and comments, and we're going to do our best to sort of incorporate them into this discussion. I also want to thank everyone who came out 2 weeks ago, which for our first Master Advisor of 2023. On that one, we spoke about the new definition of luxury travel. It was an episode I really enjoyed. I know I say that a lot, but our guest, Kyle, he was really a great guest. And I learned a whole lot from him. It changed my perspective on a few things. If you want to check that one out, it's available on demand for free on our YouTube page. We're going to drop the link to the chat in there right now. If you're heading over there and like the content, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That helps us a whole lot. It helps us keep growing this channel and keep bringing you these episodes every 2 weeks. And speaking of every 2 weeks, we'll be back here 2 weeks from today to talk about expedition cruising. Talk about what's new, how to sell those products, how to find clients appropriate for those kind of cruises. We're really excited about that one. We hope you join us. And Tom, again, just drop the link to that. If you want to register now, you can do that ahead of time. And we'll see you back here in a couple of weeks. All right. So with that out of the way, I'm very happy to welcome our sponsor for today's show. It's ALG Vacations VP of Sales, Jim Tedesco. And Jim's on with us right now.
Hey guys, good to see you all. It's nice to see some familiar names in the list. So my name's Jim Tedesco. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Apple Leisure Group Vacations. I have the privilege and honor of looking after our sales team across the US. So hopefully many of you know your BDMs and work closely with them. If you don't know them, you can go to algvacations.com/BDM finder and find who your BDM is. Today's topic, though, I'm very happy to introduce is how to deal with client disruptions. And while I'm happy to introduce it, I think I speak for many of us when I say that this part is probably the most frustrating part of all of our jobs. We're in the business of keeping our clients happy and helping them make vacation dreams come true, but if we're honest with ourselves, when we hear the words winter storm or mass airline disruptions, or even the words breaking news on the television, I think we all just take like a bit of a deep breath and brace for whatever's about to happen. But there are ways to better handle it. And I'm excited for today's conversation to walk through some of them and share some of that insight. For us at ALG, I can share with you, we have a during travel line. Obviously in mass disruptions, there could be a hold time, but there's ways to work around it. And I want to make sure that all advisors realize that if you call our 866 ALG desk phone number, there is a link for travel advisors to click through to our during travel line from there. I highly recommend that if you're calling in, you call in through that way for the during travel line, because the phone number that is on the documents is for consumers. And we do try our best to prioritize some of the agent calls coming in to help get those situated first. So while we service everybody, if you're calling in, I highly recommend doing the 866 ALG desk number. I also, some tips from our during travel team is to work ahead. If we see and know that there's a winter storm coming, if you see that airlines are creating waivers, call your clients, see what they want to do. Explain to them that if they're thinking about maybe changing and okay with doing it in advance, do it, because it's going to be a lot less chaotic to do it then than to wait on the longer hold times during the heart of the issue. Another tip is that if you know that the airline is essentially refunding a piece of the segment because of cancellation, because there's, we all see it, right? Sometimes the segment gets canceled and next available flight is 2 days later. If you know that the airline is then refunding it, go ahead and book the additional segment to get them home yourself, and we'll work on getting the refund back at another, like once everything calms down. Rather than waiting on hold, you can actually handle that yourself. We're happy to do it, but to avoid some of the hold times, if you know that that segment is getting refunded, just book another flight and we'll worry about the refund to make the client whole in the end. And then the other thing is when you do call in, look for alternatives. Know what flights that your clients might be interested in to try and get them on, because you doing that search is helping take away some of the hold time or the handle time for us, because we would be doing the exact same thing when you connect through. So if you can do some of that legwork and know what alternatives might work for your clients, rather than us starting the conversation with looking for it, it helps speed up the amount of time that we can get your clients all situated, and speeds up the time we can get to the next call to help the next customer as well. So I know our guests today, Brianne and Leah, have a lot of things on their in their offices that they use to work as well. So I'll turn it back over to our host and we'll get started with the webinar.
Yeah, well, thank you again. So thank you so much, Jim, for that introduction. You gave us some things to talk about too, I think, as we go along today. Hopefully we can add on to what you said. And Tom dropped the phone number to the ALG desk in the chat for anyone who couldn't catch that when you were talking about it. But again, I want to go ahead and introduce our two guests for today. We're very, very happy to welcome Leah Vincent and Brianna Bloom. They're both here to talk about something that's been a major part of all travel advisors' jobs over the past few years, and even over the past couple of weeks with the FAA outage last week. It's dealing with a client's travel disruptions. So again, Brianna, Leah, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're really happy and we feel really fortunate to have you both.
Thank you.
So let's get the introductions out of the way. I was hoping you could both tell us a little bit about yourself, your agency, how you got into the business. Brianna, I was hoping we could start with you on this one.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Brianne Bloom, Vice President of Vacation Travel at Fox World Travel. At Fox World Travel, we really service every type of traveler out there. So we have our corporate business side, we have meetings and incentives, and then we have our leisure team, which is what I am responsible for. Our leisure team has several brick and mortar locations and also remote team of advisors. So really able to encompass every type of traveler that is out there. And I got into the business, into the industry at the end of February 2020. So really like great time to be joining travel, right? As right before the pandemic just took hold. But honestly, it forced me to learn very quickly what this industry is all about and how do we best serve, not just our frontline team, but our clients. So I think it was a great time to join, and in hindsight, it actually worked out.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of advisors these days, and I guess people talk about pre-February 2020 as sort of an easier period, but I know there was disruptions pre-2022. I know COVID sort of mixed everything up in our heads, but yeah, you've certainly had quite a few years in the travel industry, Brianne. But Leah, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your agency, and sort of introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I'm Leah, obviously. We are a brick and mortar travel agency in Oklahoma City. There's 7 of us in the office. And then we have a team of about 120 independent agents in about 13 states. And we have a training program. And so I train new to the industry agents. I personally have been in travel since 2002. I started at Southwest Airlines, and then I transitioned to a small hole-in-the-wall travel agency, which is actually kind of funny because it used to be kitty corner from where the office is now. So it came full circle. Now they are a dog food store. And so no, I worked at the Gap, and then I've been in travel. So when the pandemic hit, people would say, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to fold jeans, so I'm going to stay and stick with this."
Yeah.
So.
We're very happy. We're very happy you stick with us. We're very happy to have you both here today. But let's get into it. I want to sort of set the context a little bit, and I know this is going to be sort of a shared experience for everyone on the call because of COVID, of hurricane season every year, of FAA outages and things like that. But I was hoping you could both just talk to us a little bit about what's it been like the last few years with these travel disruptions, with mass cancellations, with specific cancellations, with stuff like that. I mean, what is your work experience been like, Brienne? Because I guess you're newer to the industry, and this is what you've sort of experienced since day one. I was hoping we could start with you on that one.
Sure. Definitely I would say in the height of COVID, it felt more chaotic because there was so many unique situations that we just had not encountered in that volume before. But honestly, it caused us to really refine a lot of our internal processes. So, initially what seemed chaotic now almost seems like a non-event. Not that the disruptions are fun, and I get that they can evoke some stress, from us when we see, like Jim was saying, you see winter storm coming, especially, here in Wisconsin in the Midwest, right? Like we've got that little funnel of the lakes. There's always a winter storm. But they almost feel non-eventful because we were able to put in so many different processes, so that way we'd be prepared for it.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about those processes. Hopefully we'll be able to mention those processes as we go along today. But Leah, you mentioned 2002. You've seen a lot of different events affect travel. I mean, there's a hurricane, like I mentioned, there's a hurricane season every year. There's bigger events going on seemingly every few years. I mean, what's it been like for you and your agency?
Yeah, it's been, it feels like a really prolonged Zika experience for me. Honestly, that was what we thought at the beginning, was like, oh, this is just like all the other ones that have been year over year. And then obviously it was much more extreme than that. So it was really just coming together. Honestly, I think it made our office so much closer and our team so much stronger. It's actually when we took time to grow even more. And so it ended up being a positive thing for us, which sounds crazy, but we're happy that all the cancellations and stuff aren't the norm, but I feel like we can kind of get through anything with this.
All right. So I have some situations I want to go through about sort of how you would react, how your team would react when things do inevitably happen. But I mean, both of you work in different parts of the country, different agencies. I mean, is there a formal process? Leah, you mentioned your team is growing closer. I mean, does your team have a formal process now for dealing with these client cancellations or for dealing with these events when, like Jim mentioned, you do see them coming, or you do have some kind of warning that, things might not be working smoothly the beginning of this week, beginning next week, something like that?
Well, what we start out with is usually we just acknowledge it. I don't like to cause hysteria because, I mean, honestly, I'm in Oklahoma. We have a running joke that we say, if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute because it'll change. So like the predictions are so not always accurate. So typically it's just a advisement to the clients. We're aware and we're paying attention, as we can't make the determining fact, anything can't be determined a week in advance if we're talking about weather specifically. So
yeah, I imagine that is pretty reassuring for clients to just get that notice as they wake up, they see whatever headline it is about a storm coming, that they know that their agency and their advisor are aware of it and are preparing in case something happens.
Yeah, honestly, I think the communication, as long as you're communicating with them, then that keeps them so much more calm. If you act like, oh, I didn't realize, they'll be like, what? So I think that the communication and just the calm, being the calm in the storm is makes just life easier. It's just so we have to act like it's normal and that we have a plan, even though every single situation can be different. There's not like a absolute, we always do this, because every situation is different and every client's different and their scenario on if they can do a date shift or they can't do a date shift, etc., is different. So we just have to be the calming voice of, we're aware and we're going to give you the best options when we have them.
Okay. And Brienne, what about Fox World? You mentioned you have processes. Is that something that's a part of your processes, is to let the client know that you're aware something might be wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it's the core part of our process. So we, if it's something we can be anticipating, like weather, similar to what Leah said, where that the weather can definitely change. So we're not always communicating in that sense, but we are still running a list of all of our travelers that would be up and coming. So we can understand, what volume of our clients could be impacted. But if it does take place, right, and there is a disruption, then we query all of our clients who would be traveling or would be impacted, if they're going to be traveling soon. And then, like Leah mentioned, is just getting in front of it and providing that level of calm. So the goal of our communication is always to say, here's the situation. We're aware of the situation. Here's how it may impact you. And then here are your options or your resources, right? We want to be able to give them that comfort and let them know we're here for you. You have resources, and then that we're continuing to monitor the situation. And so for us, it's just about letting them know, like, your advisor is in your corner. We are aware of this, and we're going to take care of you.
All right. So, I mean, I'm curious, what level of impact does an event, or I mean, I know we mentioned weather a lot because that seems like the most obvious one, but what level of impact will you make sure it's on your radar? Like, I know weather changes constantly. Like Leah, you mentioned Oklahoma's weather, but Oklahoma City, but is there a certain status that something has to reach before you in your agency, Brianne, go through those steps to make sure you've queried your clients and you prepare sort of alternatives if things are impacted?
I mean, we have an internal system that does alert us of, and we have certain grading of it, whether it's, caution or, so it'll tell us a little bit about what the impact could be. But truly, with majority of the situations, it's after we run that query that we're really able to see what is the impact. But regardless of the amount of, clients impacted, whether it's 100 or 10, we do still try to communicate out to them. Because again, that's our goal as their advisors. We're here in their corner, we're their advocate. And we just want to make sure that they don't feel alone.
Yeah. All right. So I want to go through the situations, but one thing I do want to ask, because I know this is specific between advisors and unique from client to client, but I know a lot of advisors I speak to are getting creative in the ways they're communicating to clients, especially on the road. Leah, do you have any advice on that when you're reaching out to a client? I mean, is it depend on their preferences? Is text always easier? Is email, calls, things like that? Is there any advice you can give us?
It depends on the, I prefer email personally because it can kind of open up a can of worms, but honestly, it can depend on the client's preferences / it's different whether we're talking about people that work in the office versus an independent contractor. So I'm not going to micromanage and tell an independent contractor how they can contact their clients, but the people here in the office typically do phone calls and emails. Okay. And don't open up the text can of worms. Of course, in a specific situation, we might be with the in-travel desk and then texting the client, is this okay to go ahead and make this change? There's situations like that, but that's not going to be like a protocol type of thing.
All right. And Brianne, is it the same for you?
Yeah, very similar in that we only utilize email or phone calls. We actually do not utilize texting at all. I do find email tends to be the best form. And I think that that's because, whether you're in a different time zone, like your client is traveling, or, they might not have international coverage, so they can be connected to Wi-Fi and can, respond that way. Email does work the best for us, but we do also have, phone call service.
Okay. And I know a lot of advisors have different thoughts on this too. A couple of them I spoke to, they have WhatsApp, which I guess helps keep that can of worms shut when it comes to communication because it's easier to turn off than iMessage or text messages are. But I know there's a lot of thoughts out there for that kind of thing. All right, so we're gonna have 25 minutes left. We're gonna run through the situations, a few more questions at the end. But again, if anyone has questions for Leah or Brianne, please drop them in the chat and I'll grab them as we go along today. But the first one I wanted to tackle was what we mentioned a number of times already. It was the weather event, a hurricane, a snowstorm, a tornado, something else is coming. You have clients traveling. Brianne, I was hoping we could start with you on this one. You mentioned querying clients is the first thing and letting them know that you're aware of it. It is the first thing. Is there anything else you make sure that your team does when these things kind of happen, especially weather-related issues?
Yeah, I mean, we focus very heavily on communicating internally. And so, we do have like an open Teams channel where we're communicating. If we're noticing, there's impacts on a certain, area more than others, but really it's just following that same process of query the clients, proactively communicate out. It's the same message that we send out. So we want to make sure that it is, an all-encompassing message that we send out, but it's really just following that same process. And I think that the simplicity of that is what helps keep the team calm when these events do happen. And then, again, depending on, what part of Fox you are traveling with, like on our corporate side, for example, we do have flight tracking available. So that is an option too.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to ask both of you is it has to be difficult when your team would query something, Brianne, and you would get a large number of clients impacted. Like you mentioned 100. I imagine in some circumstances it could be more than that. What's the philosophy that you can use to stay calm? Is it just making sure you're communicating with your team and with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think Leah had mentioned this a little bit about, after all the ups and downs and chaos and roller coaster of COVID, our team internally jokes like, this is nothing, right? Like we've done this 1,000 times over. So I think keeping, it light in the sense of like, hey, we've done this before. It feels brand new to the client. So we don't want to forget that. We don't want to lose sight of that. And that's why, again, we want to make sure our communication is prompt with them and that it's detailed. But I think just internally recognizing that disruptions happen, right? And so we're prepared for when they do. We know that just because it happened this time doesn't mean that it's done, right? There's going to be another disruption. And so recognizing that that is a regular part of the role, I think also brings a level of calmness to it. And then again, just that internal communication, leaning on your peers if you're feeling overwhelmed about something and knowing that we have a process, let's follow it.
All right. So we're aware that our clients, their plans might be impacted or the plans are impacted now. Whatever weather event it is definitely has canceled flights or delayed flights for too long, you're gonna miss connection, things like that. Leah, I mean, what's your next step with that kind of stuff? Is it to get the client on the phone and just sort of run through what your options are? And are those kind of options something you prepared beforehand?
Yeah, I'm going to typically pull up and see what their options are. Like, for example, when Southwest was canceling and we were needing to see if they are open to other airlines. It really depends on the carrier too, because Southwest isn't going to reaccommodate typically on an American or United. So the client has to be open to a refund and purchasing a new ticket and waiting for the refund, since it's not going to be an instant gratification type of thing. So every client's different. Like, we don't do any corporate travel. So this is all vacation packages. There are some people that go on vacation all the time. No big deal. It's on a credit card. I can wait. And there's some people that saved up for a long time and this is their vacation and they don't have, extra money to be buying tickets on the spot. So I'm all about giving people their options and explaining like the pluses and minuses. And it's ultimately their decision. It's their vacation. They can decide, and their money, obviously. So it's their decision, and just giving them educated, calm options. And that can kind of make them feel like the ball's in their court because they get to decide what they want to do next.
Are those conversations ever difficult, Leah? Like you mentioned the latter client you mentioned, especially the ones who've saved and are looking forward to a trip. Maybe they don't get to take too often. I mean, it has to be a difficult conversation to have that says, your vacation is going to be impacted. I mean, do you feel like a therapist or sometimes when you're having those phone calls?
No, absolutely. You have to be empathetic with them, because if you're aloof about it, that's just going to make the situation worse. Yeah. So of course, some empathy will go a long ways. I mean, I'll even pull out like, this has happened to me before. Like, they've lost my bag. They've canceled my flight. It sucks. And just feeling like you're on their team or you're on their side. Like, it's obviously, you have to say that to them, like, we're going to do this together. I'm going to, that kind of thing, like being on their team, because sometimes that's what they want, because they feel like everybody at the airport is against them or everybody at the weather station is against them. So it's definitely an empathetic and kind of you're with them trying to help them and be their advocate for sure.
Yeah. I'm just curious, Leah, one more for you is that does your agency, do you specifically track your client flights? I know you might have a lot of volume, a lot of business, a lot of clients traveling. I mean, is that something you make sure that you do? You're tracking flights just to make sure they're
we're not tracking specific, like the whole agency as a whole. Each individual agent would be responsible for tracking their individual clients. If they want to go as far as, like, for example, the Flight Radar 24, that's an awesome app where you can actually like follow it and watch the flight. But what I'm typically more doing is watching for the notifications from the airlines, whether it's cancellations or now you're allowed to change, like that's a great email when your client is already like freaking out and you get this like notification that there's an advisory. So now, like 2 days before, you can make those adjustments. That makes everyone's nerves calm down, that you have that flexibility, you can change without any fees, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, Brianne, is that's something too, that those flight advisories, those change fee waivers, they must be a pretty powerful tool to use when you're dealing with your clients.
Oh, absolutely. Like Leah said, those are the good emails. And so again, and that's another thing too about why to use an advisor, is because that's something that they're going to be more on top of and be able to support the client with.
Okay. So we have some questions in the chat we're going to grab here. Again, we have a little 20 minutes or so left. So again, we're going to do our best to grab as many of these as possible. Rashida, yeah, the Leah mentioned it was Flight Radar 24. There's a number of flight tracking apps, but I know a lot of people do like Flight Radar 24. And hopefully Tom can grab the link and drop it in the chat for us too. But there's also a Flight Aware does the same thing, and that I know that one is fairly popular as well. So this is an interesting one, and it's Leah, Brianne, it's up to you if either of you feel comfortable grabbing this. But Kevin wants to know, do either of you or your agencies use any type of checklists or pre-written documents that you use during certain events to share with your clients? I mean, do you make sure ahead of time, do they have a PDF of who they need to call should this happen or that happen? Is that something you commonly do? Brianne, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, that is something that we send out with every single invoice that we send. Well, we don't send it at the same time as the invoice, but we send it out with their travel documents, and it is we highlight, exactly who are their resources, especially because we're not available 24/7, right? And so what happens when our team is not working and the client's in destination? Who do they go to? So we highlight all of those during travel numbers. We also highlight just additional links that they can utilize if they're looking for more information and we're not able to be there.
Yeah, and Lee, is that just making sure the clients know who to call? Is that something you make sure you do beforehand?
Yeah, so on the travel documents, that'd be something that we would highlight, that the during travel, honestly. But do clients look at it? No, they don't. So for our agency, the independent agents, they're reaching out to them directly. And then for our office agents, we have on our voicemail to use our online chat on our website, and that actually comes to me. So I'm that person for those 3 a.m. wake ups. So, but honestly, it doesn't happen that often, and you kind of prep and know that that's a possibility. So I don't mind in those situations. I always like to say client for life, because they see, besides you, that you got them a good price or you recommended a good hotel, that is going to move to the top of the list of, wow, at 4 a.m. she helped me and nobody else would help me. So I feel like that is, I always just go # client for life.
So we have an interesting question in the chat, and this one is relevant. And again, if neither of you can answer it, I don't think it's a big issue. But Elsa wants to know, how do you handle something like what happened this week down in Cancun with the Cancun cab protest that was preventing people from traveling to and from the airport? Do you ever talk to your clients about that kind of stuff prior to travel, and do you ever give them advice about what they can do, what can they expect, things like that? Brianne?
Yeah, we do. We actually just, I think yesterday now, had sent out a communication around it. And again, very similar format of just, here's the situation. Like our job is really to state the facts. And so here's the situation. Here's what we know. And again, here's what you have and how you could be impacted, right? So we talk about, there are included transfers, which actually are, subject to the same law as the taxi drivers, right? So they're not, the transfers that they're in are not going to be the Uber, the Lyft. And so we do try to call that out to give some peace of mind there. And then again, we talk about, who are the resources in destination. And again, that we're monitoring the situation and we'll continue to follow up with them if there's, anything else. But I think it's very important that in those instances, you do communicate just again, to show why do you use an advisor? It's that peace of mind. It's that comfort of, Leah, I think you had said like knowing that we are with them, right? Like standing next to them with this, to help them through it.
Yeah, that was an incredibly unique, when that news item came across, it was an incredibly unique situation. Like over the past 2 months, there's been an FAA outage. There's been a cab protest in Cancun, which is a major destination I know for travel advisors. And there was, like Leah mentioned, there was the Southwest issues in December. Like it does, like you mentioned, Brianne, I mean, going through experiences one by one, it must be a unique feeling when you do have a firsthand experience in dealing with these kind of situations on a daily basis. All right, so let's run through a couple more other situations. One of them I do want to get to later is Leah mentioned baggage issues, and I know that can really throw off a vacation if there's baggage issues on the outbound flight. So I was hoping to talk about that a little later, but I know a lot of advisors talk to me about a common issue is a client books an international trip, and then a week or two before they're scheduled to take the flight, they realize their passport is expired or expiring when they're on vacation. I'm curious if either of you have a formal process for dealing with passport issues, because I know that's fairly common. Leah, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yes, so really depends on what city the clients are in. So with us being in Oklahoma, the closest passport office, if somebody needs a passport within 2 weeks, is going to be in Dallas, and you can actually walk through and get your passport same day. Sometimes it is hard to get an appointment. So you can do walk-up service. We've even taken it as far as contacting a congressman, and typically we put that in their court, like this is who you contact. You contact your congressman to expedite your passport. Like, for example, if they're sending it off and they're not sure if it's going to come back in time, they can get it pulled and their passport will arrive quicker. So I feel like that happens more often than I care to even talk about. So it seems like the clients, like, especially the ones that don't travel that often, they're like, oh, I didn't realize, or whatever. But getting the passport same day, there's also one in Houston, there's one in Arkansas. Seems like we get creative on that, and it just depends on how bad do they want to go.
Do you have a high rate of success with contacting a congressman for
honestly, yeah. In Oklahoma, they're very helpful.
Yeah.
Brianne, it probably depends on your state.
Okay.
I personally had to do that, actually.
Ahead,
yeah, I personally, this was, pre-COVID, but I had, I thought I lost my passport, but really I did lose it, just not permanently, I guess. I found it after I submitted for a new one, but I did not get it back. And we were going to be leaving with less than a week. And so I reached out to my congressman, and he was able to get it expedited, and I got it back within 3 days of working with him. So personally, I have used it, and it was very simple.
Okay. So we have another question. This one's about travel insurance. I'll maybe save that one for a little later. I want to ask about the baggage question, but I also want to ask about geopolitical events, because those have become normalized along with these weather events, especially over the past few years. Everyone knows what's happening in Eastern Europe, and and we've seen throughout sort of the last decade a number of these events pop up, especially in Europe and the Middle East, North Africa, things like that. Is there anything you can sort of give advice on dealing with these kind of events, or even keeping track of these events, Brianne, when you're dealing with clients? Is this something that's become a big part of the position?
It has, it definitely has, and it's a tricky spot to be in, right? Because again, our stance is that we can really just tell you the facts, right? And so we can't say, what it's going to look like at the time you travel, and we can't decide for you if you want to, continue on with your travel plans. And so, because so much can change so often, we typically just refer to certain links. So one of them is the Sherpa site that we recommend our clients check out. And it's just a way to keep up to date on any like changing, requirements. And so changing events that are happening. And so there's, I think, 3 links that we typically will send out and really put it in the client's court to monitor unless it's, a large event where we would say, hey, this is a travel disruption, and now we're going to do our processes internally. But again, when we're asked about it, we just really state the facts, and it has to be the client's decision on, how are they feeling about travel.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people use, I know a lot of advisors use Sherpa, and hopefully we can get the link to that in the chat too. We have clients we have advisors in the chat. Jim says he had clients were affected by the protests in Peru this week. The Cusco airport was closed, and visits to Machu Picchu are negatively impacted. So again, like you mentioned, Brianne, this is something that is fairly common, and I think it's important to be aware of. We spoke about weather, we spoke about passports, but geopolitical events are certainly something to make sure we're aware of too. Leah, I want to ask something. I want to ask the next question about what you mentioned is baggage issues, which I know also becoming fairly common. You can see all these consumer stories about bags. There's been some crazy stories about people tracking their bags with the Apple technology and then finding out where they are in just some corner of the world somewhere. Do you have any advice on advisors with that? Because I know when that does go wrong, clients will probably turn to advisors to help them get some kind of solution.
Honestly, like when we usually stuck between a rock and a hard place, because typically not every airline is going to be easy to call and try to figure that kind of stuff out. So like, for example, they lost our bags on the way to Ireland this year. So I'm going to be, giving them some of my own like empathy, like, hey, that happened to me. And what I had to do is go to the baggage claim office and file the form, and they had to look for it. And so you just kind of have to go through those steps with them. I wish I had some magic answer, because it's not magical at all. Of course, I always recommend having essentials in your carry-on, and whether they listen is a different story. One thing I think is a great idea is to like pack half your stuff in your bag and half your stuff in your husband's bag. So if they only lose one, then you at least have half your stuff. Just trying to think ahead of things like that can prevent it. But honestly, it's something that can be a travel insurance claim if they need to buy new things, and it just is what it is. That sounds so bad, but like each airline's different. So like, it's not a fun conversation, but just giving them, this is what you can do. You can file a claim. Here's the information. This is what, you're allotted per day, whether they never find it or they find it in 2 days. And then like, for example, when I was in Ireland, we were moving hotels. So we were communicating, this is where we're going to be on these 2 days, and then we're moving to this next hotel. And honestly, they delivered them. So, I mean, that was nice that the airlines do that. But I mean, we had to wait 2 days for one, and then actually like 5 or 6 days for the next one. So
then
there's no magic science in that.
I again, like you mentioned, there is no magic. I think that'll be the answer to this question, but Beth has a follow-up on that, Leah. She says, when baggage is missing but transportation is waiting, what's the best procedure?
When transportation is waiting, like if the transportation company's already there.
Yeah,
It just depends on if it's private, and then they typically would wait for you versus group transfers.
Okay.
I haven't ever had that specific situation. Like, we had a private driver, so he waited for us while we did our baggage claims forms. Feel like it just depends on the client. There's some people that are like, I have to go because I can't afford another $49 for my transfer. You know what I mean? Like it just, each situation's different. I haven't ever encountered where somebody was like, I have to leave right this second and I can't file the claim. It just kind of is what it is. Typically the transfers have a window of time. There's not like, they don't know the exact moment that you land and how long it's going to take for a baggage claim to get your bags. I mean, sometimes baggage claim at Cancun can take an hour. So I've never had that situation where it was just like hard and fast, they're here and too bad you can't fill out your claim form.
Yeah. It seems
So
like
communicate with a transfer company, and it is what it is.
yeah, I mean, you both keep going back to communication seems to be the most important thing. Communication with the client, communication with the travel companies. It seems to be a job of communication. And I think that's probably one of the most important things we can get out of this. Both of you mentioned also today travel insurance. I know travel insurance sort of had a big renaissance during COVID because people saw what could happen when you don't have travel insurance. But I was curious if you could give us sort of a feel of how important travel insurance is when you're dealing with clients now, Brianne. Is it still sort of very much almost seems like a mandatory part when clients are considering how to book their vacation?
Yeah, I mean, from our stance, the word mandatory is something that we would,
Push back on
believe,
it.
right? We're like, hey, like you really, really need to have this. Obviously, we're not requiring it. But the conversations have definitely changed. It's a lot more assumptive now that people are taking insurance. And again, I think that that's just what, clients saw over the last few years and how valuable it can be. So the conversation is no longer, do you want insurance? It is what type of insurance, right? That's what the conversation has really shifted to.
Okay, yeah, that is not interesting. That is that I mean, has that been something? I guess that's just come about through client conversations. It's not something your agency has thought about doing, is asking the question a different way in order to maybe show them how important travel insurance is.
Well, we have. It is one of the things that we had worked with our team on, is that, it needs to definitely be presented to every client. And, we would recommend presenting the options, right? The this or that question of this insurance covers this, or you can take that, right? Or you can do both. But so it absolutely has become a shift that we have focused on. We also make sure that on our documents, we have clients initialing whether they accepted insurance or not, because we want to draw attention to that conversation so much. We don't want it to be something that's just, quick and fast of, do you want insurance? Nope. And we move on and the client never even remembers that conversation. We want to make sure that they know we are advocates of it. We highly recommend it. And if they're going to choose to decline it, we want them initially in that, again, just so they remember the significance and realize how much we recommend having it.
Okay. I mean, Leah, I know agencies are different, but is there anything you can point out with travel insurance? Any trends, anything in general that you want to add to what Brianne said?
Well, I think there are some tour companies like on the vacation side that have different levels of coverage. So I think having the clients understand what's covered and what's not, like some tour companies include travel insurance and we're maybe referring to it as a travel insurance, but it's actually just for cancellation before the trip. And it's not actually for coverage during the trip. So that could be a frustration if somebody thinks that. So I feel like that is, even if we say waiver, like they don't understand what that means. So you have to speak in layman's terms and have them understand what you mean by this is a cancellation waiver, whether it's insurance. Just saying, well, I said waiver, that's not going to work. Like that's just going to make them mad. So understanding the differences and whether they have good coverage or not, whether they have baggage coverage, whether they have during travel support 1-800 numbers, like a full travel insurance company will, as opposed to maybe something from a tour operator. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
okay, sorry, I have a cold, so I feel like I'm talking funny.
No, I know we were just talking before the call. I know there's a lot of colds and illness. So, but I only have a couple more. I know we're getting close on time. But if anyone has any last minute questions, please drop them in the chat and hopefully we can bring them up. But I want to ask about after the fact, when disruptions do happen, when you have to rebook. I mean, I know, again, like I mentioned, this might depend agency to agency, or advisor to advisor, but what do you consider your responsibilities after the fact? Do you take part in helping a client get a refund, or helping a client maybe track down baggage claims, things like that? Is that something that your advisors believe are part of their responsibilities, Brianne?
It's so case by case,
Yeah.
but in general sense, yes. Again, we view ourselves as the advocate, right? And so when it comes to getting a refund, we will absolutely advocate for them or talk them through the process. It gets tricky when it comes to insurance, right? We can't be filing that claim for them. So it really is case by case, but no matter what the situation is, we do believe it is our job to advise them how to get through those situations and how to go about those processes.
Yeah. And Leah, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I agree. I think we need to give them all the tools. Typically, when you're filing travel insurance, like typically I'm like sending a link. Your plan number is, here's your required documentation that they're going to ask for. But whether how they want to fill out the answers to the question on the reason for their cancellation, etc., is going to be up to them, because I don't want to file anything that's false. So I'm going to just give them all the tools, kind of like a roadmap, and then they can answer the questions
All
for
right.
sure.
So I just have one more, and I think it's a sort of a good one to wrap up on, because we're like, again, a lot of these, I know we're trying to get very specific, but a lot of these situations, like Leah and Brianne mentioned, are client to client, advisor to advisor. But how much do your clients now value your ability to deal with these kind of disruptions? I know travel has gotten more complicated over the past few years, and I know things like what we're talking about today, events, weather events, geopolitical events, make it even more complicated. But I imagine it's a fairly big part of the travel advisor job now to, like you mentioned, stay calm and to be able to deal with this and make the best out of a bad situation. I was wondering if your clients are realize that, Brianne, if we could start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think, do they realize it? I think to an extent, but I will say that, and I tell my team this too, I don't know that they will always or ever understand everything that we do behind the scenes to support them. And I don't know that they should, right? That is our job, is to work behind the scenes again, to make sure that we can give them the best experience possible. But it is definitely something that has come up more in conversations, and we do regular surveys on, what was the booking experience like with us and how did our advisor do? And that is one of the regular comments that we hear is, yeah, I feel comfortable, like I could do this on my own, but I'm terrified on what to do, should there be a disruption, right? Or so they love having someone in their corner. That is something that we hear more often from them.
Yeah. And Leah, you've been in the business for since 2002. I mean, is that something you feel like is becoming more aware of, that you are your client's advocate, that you are making their vacations way easier than it would be on their own?
I think now, especially with how much we overshare on social media, clients are understanding that aspect even more. I think some agents do a really good job of, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, and giving like examples. And you can really win maybe clients that hadn't thought of using a travel agent over with your social media presence in that aspect. Otherwise, you're telling them, but sometimes showing them and giving it in real time examples, I think that can really collect clients for you that wouldn't have ever thought of it otherwise.
All right, so we're going to wrap up here. I want to first thank Jim Tedesco from ALG Vacations for joining us a little earlier, and thank everyone, all the advisors, for coming on today. And Brianne and Thea, again, I know the schedules are so busy now, and I want to thank you both for sort of lending us your time today. I know there was a lot of we couldn't get specific because of a lot of, it's like we mentioned, there's a lot of situations that are advisor, but I certainly learned a lot. I learned some good tools from both of you. And I think what you mentioned is about just making sure your client knows you're on their team seems to be the most effective thing that maybe will help advisors when they do encounter these kind of situations.
Yes, thank you. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah. So again, thank you, Brianne. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Jim. hopefully I'll see you all back here in 2 weeks. We're talking about expedition cruising. But until then, I hope everyone stays safe and stays healthy.